Welcome to this Tuesday night live stream. If you're somebody who's watching this later, thank you. Thanks for watching this. And if you're somebody who's tuning in live, and this is tricky because I think there's going to be people who come in and out in the middle of a longer story, and that could cause problems with the chronology of what we're about to explore. But thanks for hanging out on and clicking on a somewhat macabre topic. But as a disclaimer at the beginning of this, as I talk about my journey with anxiety and how this started for me when I was in fourth grade and where it's gone now, as I talk about anxiety tonight, understand that I'm not an expert and I'm not offering advice to anybody. The only expertise I have is in my unique experience. And so as I talk about different things that may have helped me, this is not a suggestion on what might help you or other people. There are experts out there. There are great resources out there. If you're struggling with anxiety and mental health issues, please don't base it on some YouTuber's heart to heart and moment in vulnerability, but rather base it on maybe something rooted in a little bit more expertise than some dude with a hat like mine. To begin, my experience with anxiety began when I was in fourth grade, like 1994, and my parents left and they went to Europe for a trip, I think. And while they were gone, I just had like problems, and I was feeling sick. I couldn't eat, and I was nauseous, and when I was nauseous, I didn't want to eat, which just sort of made it worse because then I wasn't eating, and when you don't eat, you don't feel better. And then I don't have the strongest memories from that point in my life. But as I continued to grow and like got into high school and stuff, like there were things like school dances and stuff where I was just in this spot where I knew that I didn't feel good, and I got to this point. I kept calling it the verge, where my symptoms were such where I didn't feel sick and I didn't feel worried, but I was worried that I would feel sick or that I would feel worried. And it was an interesting spot to be in because I would get to this spot where I felt very fragile. And this would happen when I was on trips. This would happen, like I said, at school dances. This would happen in unique environments where I would then just feel very, very cautious, very fragile, and like I could feel sick at any moment, and I really don't want that. And even though I didn't technically feel sick, it would ruin the experience because the whole time I was like, man, I really hope I don't feel sick. And that was what most of my experience with anxiety was for a long time. But then it started to last a little bit longer. And in that whole like don't touch me, I'm fragile stage, part of that was I also don't want to eat because I feel like if I eat, I'm going to get nauseous and I don't want that. And so it started to be a thing of I would feel sick for like 2 days, and in those 2 days I wouldn't eat. And if you don't eat for 2 days, you then feel more sick. And this was the cycle that would just go and go. And so throughout high school, when I would go on trips, when I would, it was I thought it was travel. I was focused on my trigger. Was like, man, anytime I travel, that's when I feel bad. And then it turns out that as life went on, that was inconsistent. And I think a through line through all of this for me, and if you're somebody who struggles, you may be in a similar situation. And again, I'm not speaking for anyone or giving anyone advice, but I spent so long trying to figure out what the trigger was. Like, is it travel? Is it a change? Is it social situations? What is the one thing that puts me into this mode, that puts me on the verge where then my body takes over and says, don't worry, we'll start feeling sick now. And we'll make sure you don't eat so you continue to feel worse. And when I got to college, I didn't eat for the first couple weeks. I got very, very weak. I got very, very sick. I was like sleeping, just sleeping all day. I would wake up, go to class, sleep through class, and go back to my bed and then sleep again in the dorm. Like I was just in bad shape. And the worse it got, the worse it got. And I can't remember, and I wish I could, the moments that I broke out of whatever the episode or whatever we want to call it is. But I was looking for that too, of like what causes it, and that's inconsistent, but also what fixes it, and that's inconsistent. And so it was very frustrating for me, and that ambiguity fueled the prolonging of this problem for the rest of my life, essentially, because it could happen at any moment. And it's happened at I think somewhat predictable moments, and it's also happened out of nowhere before. And there were a couple trips that I went on with Jesse right in the beginning, like ultimate frisbee trips, and they were just plagued by this. And I thank Jesse for her patience with me. And then there were also times where I think like I set myself up for absolute failure and was fine. And the biggest example was after I graduated college. Let me step back 1 second. I have a Jimmy John's tattoo. Number 9, no tomato, add pep. My Jimmy John's order is tattooed to my arm. And people always ask me why. And that's because in college I was really sick with this anxiety, and it was just this cycle of I was afraid I was going to get sicker and I didn't want to eat, and so the more I didn't eat, the worse I got for days. And after working with a new counselor who told me like, hey, forget about the trigger, forget about the causes, let's just focus on the symptoms. You feel like you're going to throw up, but you never actually throw up. It's just really uncomfortable. And she said, push it. Try to throw up. Try. Don't force yourself to throw up. But if the thought is, man, if I eat, then I'm going to get sick, so I don't eat. Maybe say, I'm going to eat. And if I get sick, I get sick, but at least I'm going to eat. And so it was that inspired me when I was in this episode, I was like, okay, I'm going to go eat a sandwich. And the only sandwich that I could have an appetite for was the number 9, no tomato, add pep from Jimmy John's. And I didn't get sick. And I the next day I started to feel better. And then when I had my next episode, which lasted a couple weeks, I ate the sandwich every other day. And it was enough. I mean, it's a ridiculous sandwich. There's enough calories that you could sustain yourself for a week if you needed to. But for me, that was what I started to focus on, was instead of trying to figure out why I'm feeling this way, just deal with like, okay, I need to make sure I drink a bunch of water and make sure I actually eat something. Otherwise, it's going to continue for whatever reason. As I started to feel like I was in control of it a little bit, it was in the middle of college and I was almost 22, and then I started drinking. I hadn't drank my entire life for this reason. Like, it wasn't just that I was a DARE essay finalist and opposed to drugs and alcohol illegally, but it was also this like, well, I don't want to feel out of control. Like, I barely feel like I'm composed now. The last thing I want to do is be drunk, because then I don't know. And so I avoided it for a long time. And sure enough, it wasn't being drunk, but the hangover produced a symptom in me that I mean, if you've ever been hungover or dehydrated, essentially the same thing. That's what my symptoms of anxiety feel like. Of this like, just don't touch me. I just need to stay here. I don't want to drink anything. I don't want to eat it. Like that is what my symptoms are. And the way that my body and brain work is, once I feel those symptoms a little bit, my brain kicks in and says, this is anxiety. Like, this is an anxiety attack. What if I can't eat for the rest of the day? What if this one is one that lasts a week or a month? And then my brain's involved and we're out of control. And that's been my experience. And so in college and beyond, anytime I would get hungover, it would trigger an anxiety episode. And so I stopped really drinking. And it just because it created, once the symptom was created, my brain would fill in the blanks. So after college, I decided to just stare this beast in the face, and travel was what I was pretty sure was making me uncomfortable. And so I took a job where I traveled nonstop for like 2 years. I was working with a marketing company. I was like contracted to mostly CNN, and I was traveling around the country for the 2008 election. This was in 2007 and 2008. Fascinating time, and different city every day, eating different places, and I never had a significant episode. And that was the first time I was like, okay, so I thought I was going to just force myself to be in this place where I would be miserable, and I'm not. And so all that like focus on what triggers this, it's probably travel. And then I traveled like crazy and it didn't affect it. And now as an adult, it's been several years, but there've been trips that I've gone on where that has triggered it. Or not that it's triggered it, but there've been trips that I've been on where I felt the symptoms and had an episode. And for me, when I went to Burkina Faso in 2018, that was sort of, I knew what I was getting into, and I was in a place mentally there that where I was. It was a very rough trip for me for a lot of reasons, but I was forcing myself to eat a Cliff Bar every day just to have something in me. And then there were days where I felt fine and I ate great from the food that the people who were hosting us had, and I would hear them kill the chicken and then 10 minutes later go there and eat it. And that was a harrowing experience, which I would have thought, man, this is going to cause an episode. And there were days that were just fine in there. And it was like an 11-day trip, like almost 2 weeks. But I came back from that and thought, we're good. Like I have done the most extreme travel possible. I've gone to sub-Saharan Africa on the edge of a desert and just been in a rough situation, and I survived. And there was confidence that came out of that for me. And then as I've continued to grow and had experiences here and there, the big thing that was a sea change for me, and this was before the Africa, Burkina Faso was in 2018. In 2013, I posted on Facebook, and again, this is not advice. This is just my experience. But I posted on Facebook. I was so nervous. I was having an episode. I had just sort of bought my first house. And I just posted, like, I struggle with anxiety, and when it's hitting me, I don't want to eat. And whenever I was with people, and I mean, go back to high school, especially was when it was the worst, and I was dining with my friends' parents. Like, you'd go over to somebody's house and you'd eat dinner with their parents. I didn't want to eat. I didn't want to be affected. I was in my fragile state. And to have these well-meaning people tell me, like, oh, it's okay. Hey, why aren't you eating? You eat. Oh, you don't feel good? Eat, you'll feel better. And just that pressure only made things much, 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 much worse. And that sort of continued for years. And as I stopped eating with my friends' parents as we got older and was just eating with friends, I'd be in these situations where it's like, I don't want to eat tonight. And everyone's looking at me. Like, everyone noticed that I ordered food or I didn't order food. And that would be worse. And so I would order food and not eat it. And people would notice, and I felt nervous about that, and it just bothered me. And so I made this post on Facebook in 2013, I think it was, where I was like, look, I've struggled with anxiety since I was in 4th grade. I've seen counselors since I was in 6th grade. And I sometimes just don't want to eat. And I'm fine. I don't want you to ask me if I'm okay. I don't want you to tell me to relax. I don't want you to say, oh, hey, it's not a big deal. Don't worry. You don't have to be nervous around it. Like, none of that helps. I'm just telling you that sometimes I don't want to eat, and I want you to just be okay with that and say nothing. And it was a post, I think I wrote it a bit more poetically than that. But essentially, this is what I'm feeling, and sometimes I just need a little bit of space and expect that. And I was so nervous putting that out there, like being vulnerable like that. And I was just overcome by emotion when the post got tons and tons and tons of likes. And more than that, got tons and tons and tons of comments from people saying, oh my gosh, I have the same thing. I feel the same way. This happens to me all the time. Like, there's all these things that people that you just assume you're the only person who feels this way. And there's successful professionals that I was connected with, executives and things like that. There were all walks of life, people coming out of the woodwork into this post to say, yeah, I have this like exact same thing, or mine is I overeat, which is awful for me. And it was this weight off my chest of like, I had been carrying this and ashamed of it. And I had been I'd had some friendships and some relationships where people did shame me for it, and people didn't understand, and they would yell at me for it. And guess what? That didn't help. And I'd gotten to a point in my life where I had this group of friends around me that understood, and they were patient and empathetic and sympathetic. And it just let this weight off of me. And then shortly thereafter, I think that was in April, and in like August, Jesse and I started dating. And I don't ever say much about our relationship. I keep it very personal, but I will share this. When we first started dating, I told her right up front, which is, by the way, when you're dating, not a fun thing to bring up on the first date of like, oh, by the way, I'm terrified and I'm not going to eat anything and I'm going to order this food and I want you to eat. Don't feel weird about me not eating. I feel like it's awful. But Jesse was so patient with me and understood. And then the first time I had an episode, when we had gone on a trip together, and it just started to happen. And I won't share exactly what she said to me, but it was so reassuring and patient, and essentially saying like, this is fine and I'm going to be here no matter what. Don't worry about me or my reaction to this. What can we do to help you endure the symptoms? And not how do we fix them, not what can I do to fix you, to help you, but just let's you experience this, process it the way you need to process it, and I'm going to be here at your side for anything you need, and I will leave you alone for anything you don't need. And that amount of patience was new to me, from my peers. And for years after that, I was fine. I was in this place where I had let it all go, and the people that were close to me were people that I had been open with, of like, oh, by the way, I might not eat. And so many times, if I said that to somebody, then I would eat like a champion. And if I just got rid of that stigma of like, I got rid of the nervousness of saying, hey, this is gonna be a bad meal for me. I'm sorry about that. And nothing to do with you. Then my appetite would come. And so really difficult to identify the triggers and what makes it better or anything like that. And I'm not suggesting anything or telling you how to interact with people or do disclaimers before you go on dates or anything. But for me, that was just this weight lifted. And that was always the extra level. Like I felt bad, but then the worst part was really pretending like I didn't feel bad and trying to be social and interactive and fun and be Sean when I felt miserable. And being able to just take that layer completely off and throw it away and say like, I'm not hiding this. This is just going to be how tonight feels. Don't worry about me. And for the people to say like, okay, it was just an absolute metanoia, that affected me in ways that I didn't fully even appreciate at the time. But it paved the way for me being like from age like 28 to like for the next, I don't know how many years, a lot of years till now, really being in this place where I felt ownership over it. I felt control over it to an extent, and the comfort of knowing that if I lose control, I'm surrounded by people who will be patient with me, who will understand, who will provide me with what I need, space wise and support wise, to endure it. And so it's been a journey. And then I started having an epiphany about 3 years ago. Excuse me for one moment, and then I'll tell you that. Water. Every time that this happened, yes, I wouldn't eat, but I also wouldn't drink water. And as I thought about it, and I can't, again, I'm not diagnosing anything, but I think a catalyst to all my experiences that I didn't realize for a long time, but a through line was, if I was in a spot where I wasn't drinking enough water, that hangover feeling, that dehydration, like I said, that's the symptom. And so if there was anxiety with a chaser of dehydration, I would be in a rough place, and it would take me a while to recover. And it was after I started eating salty stuff, which would make me drink water, and that's how I would start to recover. And so there'd been a few situations in the past 2 years, really, I guess, pandemic style. And I had pandemic style. I had my podcast. If you follow my podcast, I have several like live anxiety attack episodes, which is a really weird thing, but it was really helpful. But what I would do is chug a glass of water, like full glass of water, and walk. And again, to Jesse's credit, crazy helpful and patient to like, I could be like, hey, I feel like this could go dark, but I'm going to drink some water and I'm going to leave, and I'll be back in 30 minutes. And it wasn't about like clearing my head or anything, but just like the walking, there's something about having the task of moving someplace where like I'm moving away from my house and then I'm moving back to my house, that sort of builds in this, like, rather than sitting somewhere and waiting to feel better, that occupied my mind. And I used to play like iPad games and like Snood and sort of like those kind of things. And that helped me stay distracted during it. But lately it's been, let's drink a whole bunch of water and let's walk. And it's been really helpful. And this morning, and what prompted this as the topic for tonight's live stream, this morning was the first time in a while that I had an episode where I couldn't sleep last night, and I went to bed around midnight, and I woke up around 4:30 or so and realized that I was never going to fall back asleep by about 4:45. And so I got out of bed and I came downstairs and was just miserable, and I was in my head and I couldn't do, and I drank water and stuff. Like I did all the things that I thought I should do, and I just couldn't get out of it. And after a while, 2 hours later, turned on a yoga. We have like the Apple Fitness Plus, and I did a yoga with Dustin Brown as the instructor, if you care. And there was this move where you're like balancing on one shin, like on one knee, and lifting your leg out in front of you. And it's a really tricky thing to balance. And as he's doing this, and it's sort of, if you've ever done yoga, it's a kind of like solemn, peaceful, mindful thing. And he's saying like, wave your little arms like a birdie, and it's going to help you as you do this balance thing. And he's falling and laughing. He's like, this is kind of the point. Like, we're not used to balancing this way, and it feels funny. It's okay. And I'm only now realizing the metaphor built into here. This is happening in real time. But that laugh was enough that it broke me out of it. And I sort of had this self-awareness that came after I had been just buried in the fog, where I sort of rose above it for a second and snapped out of it. And then my nervousness had been when Luca wakes up, when my son wakes up, fatherhood starts, dad on duty. And if I'm not ready to perform as a father, if I'm not ready to take him where he needs to go and feed him and do the things, like if I am incapacitated because of anxiety, that's been my biggest fear for the past, let's say, almost 3 years. And before that, as I anticipated having children. And to be in a spot where you don't know if you'll be able to do the most important thing that is required of you, of caring for an active 3-year-old, it's terrifying. And so I was in that space. And then when I saw him this morning, when he woke up, when I went into his room, he looked at me and he's like, "Good morning, Dad." And it was this, he didn't say it, he doesn't understand, but his tone was one that, and maybe this is something you can extrapolate, and this is what I've gotten from the people who have been great supports over the years, but his tone was just like, "Hey, I don't care. I'm glad you're here. I don't know what we're doing today. I don't care. I don't know if you feel good or bad, but I'm glad you're here. And I'm going to be here with you." And I don't think he was being that empathetic, being that compassionate, but in that childlike patience and intrigue and connection is something that I see in the adults and in my peers who give me that support, that space that I need. And as I go back for a second and think about the yoga pose and pushing ourselves into different places and letting go, to say it's okay to fail, it's okay to feel uncomfortable, it's okay to not want to eat. And some of it is amazing. And when you zoom out and look at it from a different perspective of the things we experience as humans and the relationships and the situations that we're in and all these things that are so complicated and can cause so much anxiety, when you zoom out and you think like, wow, this is incredible that I as an individual am experiencing this broad swath of things, it's kind of beautiful. And I can say that now, sitting here in this chair, but in the moment, I absolutely don't have that perspective. And so that's my history from 4th grade until this morning, of sort of how my journey with anxiety has been, focusing on triggers, then forgetting triggers and focusing on symptoms and allaying the symptoms, and then building a peer group around me that gives me the space and support that I need simultaneously when I'm feeling that. And that has relieved a whole lot of the anxiety that I felt, and hydration and not getting hungover certainly helps a lot. But as I look to the future, as I look to forecast, because it's not the kind of, like, anytime I had sort of a breakthrough moment, there's this part of me that's like, oh, I figured it out. I'm not going to deal with anxiety anymore because now I have this support. I have, whatever. And it's never that clear cut. It's never, I mean, it happened to this morning. So anything that's happened until this morning hasn't fixed everything. And I don't think it ever will be. And I think for a long time, I was like trying to identify the triggers and what fixed it, what popped me out of it, with this end goal of like, well, I just want to beat this where I don't have to deal with it anymore. I can look back and say like, oh man, yeah, I used to deal with that. But because it continues to endure, it puts me in the spot where I can't sit here and say like, and I figured it out. And if you do these 3 things, then you too can beat anxiety like I did, because that's not realistic. That's not how it works. And I had an episode this morning, and I don't think I did anything today that fixed everything for good. But looking to the future and shifting my brain to be in a spot where instead of saying I need to avoid things that might trigger it, I need to make sure that I'm in a spot where I'm never solely responsible, because if I become incapacitated, if I can't avoid the triggers and I do become incapacitated, I can't go camping with my kid, because if I have some panic attack in the forest, I've left a 3-year-old to fight the bears on his own. That's not sustainable. But being in a spot where I surround myself with patient people, where I take calculated risks, and I just continue to push a little bit, and then know that when I am affected by it, there are people I can reach out to, there's supports around me, and there's the space and understanding to find relief and to work through these things. And that's what I think my future looks like, is the acceptance of this might be a thing, and I don't know with what frequency it's going to happen, but I'm not going to sit here and say I'm never going to feel it again. It could be later tonight, it could be tomorrow, could be a year from now. I've gone years without an episode. I've also had episodes every other week. It's inconsistent, and so I think as I forecast my future, just being in that space of accepting it, to say this is how it's going to be, and it's okay. And I have this added layer of comfort knowing like my life is awesome. This is like the one bad thing in my life. Everything else, perfect. Nothing to complain about. Great family, great life, great career, all these things. And those were the things that people would tell, like when they were trying to calm me down and I think doing more harm than good. It would be this like, what are you worried about? Like, just remember, like you're safe. And it's like you don't understand. You're not helping. And as I found new peers and grew and changed, it seems like I found people who understood it a little bit more. But that surrender to, I'm not looking for triggers. I'm not looking for a fix once I'm in the trigger, but just an acceptance of this might happen, and I need to just stay calm during it, give myself the space that I need to deal with it, and be open with those around me. Because for me, I think I made a video about I think it was called My Jimmy John's Tattoo, and I never really fully explained it in that video. But the line that I stumbled upon, and I think I already said it tonight, was like, the worst part of my anxiety is pretending that I don't have it. And when I removed that layer of it, and found community amongst other people who feel very similar things, or different things that affect them in a very similar way to how mine affects me socially and emotionally, that community gave me strength. And I hope that the people that I connected with through that and continue to connect with, even in like a YouTube video like this, there are people who maybe will watch this and be like, oh yeah, me too. And that connection that I feel to these people and the connection that they hopefully feel to me offers some tiny piece of relief. And that is a very cool thing. And so that dual benefit of not only removing that stress from me of carrying this around and trying to hide it, but also feeling community with people who have very similar experiences, maybe not symptomatically, but similar experiences socially because of it. That's powerful to me. And that's something that means a lot to me, and why I sit here and talk for 30 minutes on a YouTube live stream about my experience, because it was helpful for me, and maybe it could be helpful for someone else. And again, I want to reiterate that I am not an expert in anything other than my own personal experience. I am not certified in anything at all. This has just been me reflecting on the mistakes that I've made and the positive progress I've made over the years and the things that I've learned about me, and everyone is different. So find resources, talk to close friends and family. For me, the biggest thing was I was afraid that people were going to judge me for it. And as soon as I started talking to people, it's that Dr. Seuss moment of those who mind don't matter, and those who matter don't mind. And that proved very true. There were a couple people who were annoyed by it and burdened by my experience, and I'm not connected with them anymore. And that's good. It sucks that it took that, but that's good. And the people I am connected with are people who understand and who are patient and empathetic and compassionate. Maybe because they've got similar experiences, maybe just because they're patient, compassionate, empathetic people. And those are the kind of people I like to surround myself with. So my point in this is saying, if you've got someone you trust, but you're afraid to tell them because you're worried they'll judge you, it's one of those situations where reach out. And if they're truly a good friend, they'll be there for you. And if not, then you will save yourself some time in ending a relationship sooner than you might have otherwise, before you realized how one-sided it was. So thank you for listening. Thank you for listening to my story, especially if you're rewatching this. Like to the people who watch this live, it's incredible. And I see that there's 3 of you, and I've watched that go up and down. And it's an interesting layer to these live streams of seeing who's around, seeing who's not, seeing what topics maintain a crowd and what topics repel people. And there's a lot of elements in this that determine who's around to watch. But to know that there's 3 people who've sat with me through this, that alone is a powerful thing that makes me feel special, and that makes me feel comfortable and willing to share, willing to be vulnerable, and tell my story in hopes that there's some fragment of it that might help someone else. So to the people who've watched this live, thank you so much. And to the people who are watching this later, thank you so much for enduring this and listening to my story. It means a lot to me. Again, look up resources around you, because there are some, and they can change your life if you're struggling with something like anxiety or depression. That's all I got. Again, thank you so much. I think I said this was a Q&A. I don't see any comments whatsoever. So with no Q's, there will be no A's. I hope this microphone was working. But have a great day or night, whatever, wherever. See you later. Bye.